It is so good to see each and every one of you, some of whom I've been talking on the phone with for the last 10 years and haven't actually seen you. So this is such a treat. I know you're all very busy, and I appreciate you coming, as well as folks are also tuning in on their computers from out of state. So welcome to you folks as well. In my reading over the last probably 2 to 3 years, I have, and you know I read across many disciplines, whether it's IT or history or economics, whatever. I've continued to come across the term the super elite. And I'm sure just as you, I figured I knew the super elite were just the people who travel the world in their Learjets and run around on their yachts. So and they're very wealthy. What more is there to know about them? It turns out a lot. The context in which these authors, and I hope you took some time to just check out a portion of the books I've read on this topic. A goodly portion of these authors, though, are referring to the global elite as a dangerous force in our world, something that it's critical, a group of people that it's critical for us to know who they are and what their agenda for us is, because they have, for the most part, shaped the world that we have today and will continue to shape it until we establish what these authors, for the most part, not every single one, refer to as a countervailing force to these people, all right? And the first step in doing that is knowing who they are, all right? Because this kind of information is not in the mainstream media. Number one, because they own the mainstream media, and they're not conspirators. They don't need to be conspirators. They're that powerful, all right? But they do function best out of limelights like this, all right? They prefer to be behind the scenes. So you are not going to be coming across this information in Time magazine or on, your favorite website. But at any rate, as I said, the first step in establishing this countervailing force is the knowledge of who they are. And that's my goal today, is to identify in a general sense who they are, and then to talk very specifically about who they are and how they have managed to become such a profound influence on our times. All right, so, and thank you to all of my audio-visual support people for making it easy for me to just get started. And if I press the right button, there we go. Okay. If I, or most of us, were to be asked who rules the world, the answer, most obvious answer, well, it's the leaders of countries, it's the leaders of large corporations, but probably it's the leaders of the most influential and powerful countries. And the only problem with that answer is that we'd be dead wrong, and that we have been dead wrong for quite some time. Those of you old enough to remember who, and he's still alive and kicking, Brzezinski is. He was the national security advisor under Jimmy Carter, but continued to be a force in international relations, continues to this day. This is a quote: the nation state as a fundamental, let me get this going, okay. The nation state as a fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state. Okay, so the nation state is somewhat obsolete. Okay, dare I say the word, all right? The only problem with this, folks, he made this statement in 1972. So this movement has been afoot for quite some time. Let me see, is that the, yeah, no. So what's the very next slide? Okay, supportive of that is the fact that if we look at this chart, it's giving us the top 100 countries / corporations in terms of income. So in terms of countries, it's ranking the countries of the world by their revenue, which means their tax income. That's the only way countries make money, okay? As far as corporations, it's their sales, all right? But all of them can be referred to in the sense that they are an economy. So the top 9 economies in the world are countries, and countries are represented by black print. The 10th largest economy in the world is a store. It's Walmart, all right? And we're not going to go through all of this, so just glance across this chart and realize that the entities in black are the countries, and the entities in red are the private corporations. There are 119 countries in the world. So out of the top 100, the vast majority of the largest economies are corporations, simply by sheer amount of income. Does that make sense? Okay, so the nation state, that first map that I showed you where the countries were all in bright colors, those entities have faded into the background, and now what we have are brands, okay? International corporations that are ruling the world. And here is the crux of the problem, that the areas of influence of these corporations do not coincide neatly with national boundaries, okay? Amazon doesn't start in Los Angeles and finish in New York, all right? It's not that neat of a world anymore. So the countries, unfortunately, even though the corporations are expanding beyond borders, countries can't do that unless they invade other countries, and the only people doing that these days are the Russians, for the most part. So the problem we face is that we have a global economy, but not a global government. All right? The majority of economic activity occurs in unregulated areas. Into this unregulated void has stepped the global elite. And most economic decisions that affect us are made by people who are unelected and unaccountable to anyone. They are essentially power brokers. And there is no countervailing force in the world to stand up against them. Okay, now let me put that in kind of practical terms. Let's assume you are Amazon or you're Microsoft, whatever. The effect this has on our world is as if half of Amazon were following policies and procedures established by management. They had, weekly meetings, teams set up. There were lines of communication established, lines of authority established and followed in half of the company. The other half of the company is free to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, however it wants. That's the state of our world today. That's what it means to have a global economy without global governance, all right? So the global elite have, and I'm blocking this, all right? The global elite, as I said, nature abhors a vacuum. So the global elite have taken their place in the crevices, so to speak, between regulated areas and other regulated areas. Oh, sorry. Thank you. And, you know, this is not an eat the rich kind of presentation. This is not, you know, we got to go get these guys, because in reality they can perform a very necessary function. All right, that example I gave of Amazon being divided into two distinct entities, one of which operates according to rules and laws, and the other which makes it up as they go along. The power broker can perform a very vital function in terms of connecting those two halves. And this is what the better, those of a better nature as far as the global elite do. Although, for the most part, whenever they do it, it is definitely to their own advantage. They are not connecting countries or corporations out of the goodness of their heart. Okay, these are people for whom the primary motivation is making money. They're in business, right? We will see there's also an element that is referred to as the shadow elite. And these are people like Osama bin Laden, extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, but not really part of the agenda of the civilized world. Other parts of the shadow elite, people who are engaged in sex trafficking, who are money launderers, all right? They roam, this is like the wild, wild west. No, there's nobody to stop them. That's why sex trafficking is probably one of the most lucrative industries now in the world. And what these authors are so concerned about, again, is none of this is there a countervailing force. Individual nations are not strong enough to step up to stop them, and neither are corporations. And the corporations, for the most part, also benefit from there being broad areas of activity where there are no regulations, where they don't have to worry about whether they're polluting or not, where they don't need to worry about if they're creating safe working conditions for their workers and paying them a fair wage, whether discriminating against women. They would rather not have to deal with any of that. The fact that they do have to obey the laws of nations in which some of their activities occur is more of a hindrance than a help for corporations. Okay, so clear? Who, where, why? All right, and think about this, folks. This is globalization. This is the world that we really live in, not the one, you know, on what? Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and all of those things that we kind of still hope America is about, all right? We have to take those glasses off and put on the glasses of reality and accept the fact that this is the world we are functioning in, and it is basically a dysfunctional world. All the feelings, and I was talking to one or two of you earlier, the feelings that we have that, you know, things just aren't quite right in the way this world is running. Okay, it's as if we're at the football game and, you know, they're moving down the field and all of a sudden some people in baseball outfits come on and start, you know, batting balls around, and then some soccer players come in and say, you know, really, is this isn't right, okay? We have that sense, and it's a well formulated sense that something is wrong, and this is at the heart of it. Okay, and it's not all that unlike what Europe is struggling with. Okay, the European Economic Unit has one currency, but not one government. Okay, and that continually presents problems to them. They're handling it pretty well, and it's a wonderful experiment to try to combine and organize countries that for the last thousands of years have done nothing but go to war with one another, okay? This kind of sets the stage for what I'm going to be talking about from here on in. Who are the global elite? I'm going to talk generically, just give you some demographics of who they are, and then we'll talk about specific individuals, okay? Now, ladies, I'm glad you're sitting down, okay, because I know you will be shocked by the fact that 96% of the people running the world are not women, all right? Okay, so we have our male counterparts to thank for the state of our world. And David Rothkopf, whose book I relied on heavily for this presentation. David is a professor of political science at Columbia. Says, you know, it's amazing, 51% of the population of the globe are women. 51%. And we have basically no representation among the powerful. And we're surprised that there's the Me Too situation. Really? Okay. So here are the general characteristics. They're not only male, they're old men, okay? But 65 isn't that old anymore. If you look at the average age of the men in our Congress, and our Congress reflects this, 99% are men, all right? Some of them are practically corpses, all right? But they're still sitting there making decisions about our health, and about our country. So 65 is not all that old. So, and if indeed they are dying off, so the idea is, I started reading this, I thought, well, we just wait until they are underground and then we start over again. The problem is they're handing off their wealth to their inheritors, and their inheritors are stepping into their position as power elite. All right. They are, for the most part, they started as, the power center is changing literally as we're sitting here. But to begin with, it was definitely a transatlantic cadre of men, meaning North America and Europe. That is changing, and the center is moving toward Asia, and I'll discuss that a little bit more further. They attend, where's this? All right, so they attend, interestingly enough, and you'll see, the same Ivy League universities. Something like 40% of them attend the same, well, I have the statistics in the next slide, so I'll give it to you. But they knit together when they're very young, all right? And if you go to Harvard or Yale, you probably go there because Daddy went there, all right? Joe Blow, the plumber's son, even if he got straight 800s on his SATs, probably doesn't get admitted to Harvard or Yale. This is a very exclusive group of universities. They tend to be in business or finance, because that's where the money is, right? No secret there. They tend to inherit their wealth, and they also tend to have an institutional power base, which may be a company, it might be a country, they may indeed be the leader of a country, or it could be a fan base. It could be Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. I don't know, are they still, did their fan base divide in two or something? I haven't kept track very closely, but people like that. Bono, for instance, does a lot. He's a member of the global elite, and he does a lot of good. Okay, Bill Clinton is a member of the global elite, and the Clinton Foundation does a lot of good. So these are all not hoodlums and bad actors, okay? But again, they do tend, even though they act as individuals, and we'll stress that later. They don't attend meetings or do their stuff representing their base. They do it representing themselves, but they do have a very strong base beneath them. Rex Tillerson, okay, is kind of a poster child for this type of person. Rex, as you know, was originally the CEO of ExxonMobil. As I said, there's 191 countries in the world. ExxonMobil does business in 185 of those. Okay, so tell me how powerful Rex Tillerson was. He's taken a big step down, becoming the Secretary of State of a country who's got big problems, okay? And he doesn't like, Rex is not a happy camper, have you noticed? All right, he's probably kicking himself for leaving ExxonMobil because he snapped his fingers and the governments of 185 countries did exactly as he told them. Okay, so that's the type of people we're talking about. The other thing, and we'll examine this, they tend to be members of the same international groups, things like the Trilateral Commission, okay, Davos, and we'll look at this. And then, as I said, the shadow elite is also part of it. This is the just kind of dispersal statistics as far as percentage-wise, where they come from. North America and Europe are about the same, around 20-25%. Only 12% from South America, and gee, here's a surprise, only 5% come from Africa, even though the natural resources of the country of Africa have been fueling our development for the last several hundred years, but we don't let them play. This is a new development, and this is primarily China and India. The newest billionaires last year, named by Forbes, were Chinese and Indians. So the nature of not only the group of old men, okay, and these are younger men, okay, the Asians are new, and as you can imagine, the IT group is a group of younger men, although the IT people like Bill Gates and was Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg don't tend to be joiners, okay? Most of them have kind of an Asperger-y thing going on, right? Okay, so they don't join clubs. They don't play well together. So the IT industry, which, and here, this is another area of dysfunction, the IT industry, which is taking over the world as we speak, doesn't really mix well. They're kind of literally islands unto themselves, and that's scary because they are the future, and they have captured the majority of the data available on which the rest of the world runs, okay? And I digress, but I think this is the point to digress. Within the next few months, if not already, we will see that the next big disruption in the markets is going to result from the development of an atomic computer, all right? The present-day computers are binary, work on a kind of an X and O basis. These computers are based on the principles of subatomic physics. They require the computers have to be housed in, you know, minus 350-degree environments, but they process data instantaneously. Okay, as soon as the data hits the system, it's transferred. There's absolutely no time lag whatsoever. It's going to make our current computer systems look like Granny's rotary phone. All right? It's going to be the Y2K of this decade. All right? So we can't dismiss our friends in the IT industry, but they, as I said, are somewhat of an entity unto themselves. All right. Again, the winds are blowing eastward as far as power. And when, and this is discussed among these authors, what will the changes be when the Asians are in charge of the world agenda? Because they do look at the world different. They have different values from us, and they, not that they're going to be any less interested in money. They still have that in common, but the way they get it is a bit different. Okay, so here's the universities. Okay. This is surprising, the top one, so here we go. 1/3 went to 20 universities, and 1/2 went to 40, okay? So these fellows met, you know, in their fraternities, they met in class, and they continued their relationship into adulthood and into their businesses. The rest, as you can see, for the most part, are Ivy League, University of Mumbai, London School of Economics, Moscow State, and Zurich, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, etc. So it's not exclusively American Ivy League, but for the most part, it is. All right, this is, are you familiar with Oxfam? Is that ring? Okay, see heads nodding, all right. So this is a quote from a recent Oxfam research report that over half the world's billionaires either inherited their wealth or accumulated it through industries which are prone to corruption or cronyism. Okay? So half the world's billionaires have not worked a day in their life. All right? That makes them almost instantaneously dysfunctional. And I've happened to have seen this firsthand in my family. One of my family members married into a trust family. Her husband drank himself to death by the age of 50. The entire 36 people who are living on the trust are, for the most part, dysfunctional people. All right, it's almost child abuse to set up children so that they never have to work. And what is under siege right now, and has been for quite some time, are inheritance taxes. And the current Congress just lowered the bar in terms of how much inheritance tax has to be paid. And the people who established those laws were very insightful. What they realized is that a democracy requires that every generation make its own way. That nobody gets to start with a head start. And you do that by sustaining high inheritance tax. Okay, now the concept seems to make, perfect sense. I worked my way up, and goddamn it, I'm going to give my millions to my kids. Okay, well, if everybody that does that gives their billions now, and you know, a million now is pocket change for these people, okay? And so telling them that they can't transfer those billions without paying, without reducing the size of that inheritance to a point where this new generation is going to have to earn its own way, all right? You can kind of understand the resistance to that. But like I said, the folks who formulated the concept of a high inheritance tax really did have their finger on the pulse as far as what is best for democracy and, quite frankly, best for the individuals involved. All right. All right, this is now, we're starting to talk about how, other than going to college together, how these people formulate their relationships, okay? And that's the heart of how the super elite work, is through their relationships, all right? It is, if you will, the ultimate old boy network, okay? Networking, we all understand networking. This is networking taken to an astronomical level in terms of power and money that is at play. All right, so one of the ways after college that they continue to maintain or make new acquaintances is at very exclusive meetings such as Davos. Everybody has heard of Davos, right? The Davos man, shake your head if, yes, okay. In fact, they just met last month. You have to be invited. It's very exclusive, and it costs $25,000 to enter the door. And they have general sessions, but the, as I say, they exchange views, coordinate strategies, and shape policy captured by the paparazzi in adoring media. Well, let me tell you, the real business that they're doing is not happening in front of the paparazzi and the media. The real business gets done in the back rooms, okay, or simply by exchanging business cards and their personal cell phone numbers. All right, doesn't happen in the general sessions where they talk about world peace. All right, so I'm not going to say these organizations are fronts for the global elite, but kind of close to it. It gives them cover to get together and decide on things like, what are the interest rates going to be in the world for the next 3 years? Okay? What war are we going to support and not support? Who are we going to get elected president in company or country XYZ? All right? That's the real agenda when you come to meetings like this. Another entity which is about 70 years old, about 50 years old. It was started by David Rockefeller, who is a descendant of the original Rockefellers, which is the banking industry. Started this Trilateral Commission. If anybody, I would imagine some of you have heard of the Trilateral Commission. The majority of people never come across this, okay? But you will see, for instance, anybody recognize this fine fellow? Anybody? Who? Vladimir? Vladimir Putin? You would be right. Bingo, give this man a prize. That's Vladimir, okay? So this is the kind of people that attend these meetings, all right? And bear with me, because this is going to be boring as can be for the next 30, 40 seconds. I'm going to flip through the names of meeting attendees, okay, dating back to the 70s, and then we're going to jump forward to the 2000s. And it's just to give you a flavor of the kind of people who gather at these meetings. Okay, oh, and this is their description of their organization. Trilateral Commission is non-governmental Nothing to do with governments. Policy-oriented forum that brings together leaders in their that's the important thing, in their individual capacity, not as president of this and president of that, from the worlds of business, government, academia, press, media, as well as civil society. Okay, this is again 1973. Just look at the titles of these people. Okay, Chairman Wells Fargo, Senior Partner at Lehman, President of Bank of America, Chairman Wachovia, Lehman again, Chairman Chase Manhattan Bank, President of the Federal Reserve. Okay, this is not your local Rotary Club. This is not the Moose Lodge getting together to do whatever they do at the Moose Lodge, okay? We had, now again, this was in the 70s when unions actually weren't impotent. It's I.W. Abel, who was the president of the steelworkers at that point. And then we have a whole contingent from Senate and Congress. This gentleman actually attended the Trilateral Commission in 1973, Jimmy Carter, okay? And it's like, Jimmy Carter is too nice, okay, to be a member of this group, all right? He probably never attended again. He would not feel comfortable with these folks. Okay, here's the corporate sector. Look at the level of power at these meetings. Chairman Coca-Cola, Chairman Bendix, Chairman TI, Chairman Deere, Kaiser, Caterpillar, Hewlett Packard, Sears. Okay, and then some few people who actually went to school and are representing their universities. All right, now I'm jumping forward to 2005, and it's interesting, you can't get, obviously, I did get this on the internet, they don't publish their annual meeting lists regularly, okay? Like, I couldn't find anything within the last 4 or 5 years. But you can bet it's the same caliber of people who are attending. All right, Paul Wolfowitz, president of the World Bank. And if you know anything more about Mr. Wolfowitz, anybody know what position he held? Doug, what was he involved with?
Not national security advisor.
Close. No, actually that's right. For?
U.S. government.
Yes, but which president?
Oh, George W. Bush.
There you go, bingo. We have another prize winner. Okay, Mr. Wolfowitz is probably the single man who is most responsible for us being in Iraq. Okay, he was the advisor to George W. Bush, and he pushed that agenda that we needed to go in there and get that oil. All right, but here in 2005, he was just the lowly president of the World Bank. Paul Volcker, Alan Greenspan, and Jamie Dimon. All right, if you can envision a spider web, and in the center sits the great big mother spider with her tentacles on every single spindle. The face on that spider would be this gentleman's, okay? The president of J.P. Morgan Chase Manhattan Bank. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on. Okay, just again, Robert McNamara, this was in 2005, attending this meeting. John Thain, who was the head of Goldman Sachs at that time, and then Larry Summers. Larry Summers is probably in the backup position. He probably plays, I don't know, guard or something for Jamie Dimon. He's everywhere, causing problems for the rest of us. Here's the press, level of involvement of the press in these groups. President Dow Jones, AOL, Time Warner, and Newsweek. Okay, Fareed Zakaria, he's still in charge. Here we have a director of the CIA. We have Henry Kissinger. Here's more Senate and congressmen. Okay, so that was the Trilateral Commission. That's just one of their groups, and I'm going to kind of breeze through some of the other groups. But that was I took the time to do that, like I said, simply to give you an idea of the level of power that congregates at these organizations. And probably the people that come here aren't really even the most powerful, okay? The people that are really calling the shots probably don't even bother, all right? They don't need to. They don't need to network. All right, this is another group. Anybody here heard, I had not heard of the Bilderberg group. Anybody hear of the Bilderberg? Have you really? Interesting, okay. I had to research it. This is an article from Time in 2016. It's saying a shadowy world government, political kingmakers, a capitalist cabal looking to impose its will on the globe. For decades, conspiracy theorists have tried to decode the secret Bilderberg group, an annual gathering of a bunch of old men, is what it comes down to at this point, okay? An annual gathering of some of the world's most powerful figures, but truth be told, the most powerful figures are a bunch of old white men. All right, so the Bilderbergs in 2017 met in this hotel in Virginia. And anybody recognize this fine fellow who attended the 2017 Bilderberg meeting? Who, Bill?
That Newt Gingrich?
No, not Newt Gingrich. This guy is actually, in some sense, running our country today as we sit here. Anybody?
Jamie Dimon?
No. H.R. McMaster, okay, who is the, of course, we got to check what time it is in terms of what position anyone holds in the Trump administration right now. But as of when we walked in here, he was the National Security Advisor. All right, and there he is at the meeting of the Bilderbergs, okay. This is a 20, now I was able to get a recent meeting list of the Bilderberg group. Am I okay here, Todd? Because otherwise I'm blocking Vicky. Okay. President of Deutsche, so this was the June 2017 meeting. And again, I'm just going to rush through this. Treasurer of Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs chairman, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, former deputy of the director of the CIA, a senator, ambassador to the United Nations, Hoover Institute, and look who's here. Let's see, back here. Senator Lindsey Graham. Okay, probably one of the most powerful senators in our Congress. Here, another deputy national security advisor, former chief of defense, Deutsche Bank again, Henry Kissinger. Let's go back here. So Henry Kissinger, Christine Lagarde, a woman, okay, who was, I think she still is in charge of the International Monetary Fund. They tried to move her out by charging her with some outrageous bit of impropriety. I don't think it stuck. So this is a kind of a graphic of, and again, I just talked about these three organizations. There's others, for instance, the Council on Foreign Relations, Institute for International Economics. There's many more, but very similar and very similar level of power represented there, okay? And again, they do not represent their country. They don't come to these as Americans. They come to these groups as representing themselves, and they network to set the agenda and then carry it back to their base, okay? What they really come for is access, all right? This is how the powerful people work. They don't want to have to call the chairman of the Federal Reserve and get transferred 3 or 4 times through secretaries and talking to assistant directors, et cetera. They want to be able to pick up the cell phone and on their speed dial, press one number and be talking directly to the person who's going to solve whatever problem they have today, okay? The definition of the global elite is about 6,600 men who on a daily basis make decisions that affect millions of people across the globe, okay? 6,600 people who on a daily basis make decisions that affect millions of people across the globe. And you can't do that by going down organizational charts and trying to figure out who is running what, okay? That's the whole point of spending time at those organizations, is they get to know the people who are going to solve the problems they anticipate having, and people getting to know them. So it's about access, because access is power. And interestingly enough, in reading some of these books, do you know who the single most well-connected person in the world is? Someone who literally knows everybody who is anybody. Just take a guess. What?
Donald Trump?
Oh. The lady at the right says Donald Trump, and actually Mr. Trump does not play in this league, okay? And I could explain at length why, but good try. Anybody else? Guess? Okay, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton knows everybody, okay? He is the most well-connected man in the world. And if you know anything about Mr. Bill, starting out in Hope, Arkansas, as the son of a single mother, he figured out very early that it is who you know. And he literally, his Rolodex, or whatever it's on now, okay, goes back to when he was 2 years old. He probably was promoting himself in second grade, all right? But he figured out you needed to remember people and needed to stay in touch with them. And that is the primary secret to his success. It's how he went from Hope, Arkansas, to being a governor of Arkansas, of all places, to being president of the United States. He could pick up, at that time, the phone, okay, and arm wrestle anybody that he needed to arm wrestle. The description of what he's doing today with the Clinton Foundation, I read, he literally corralled a group of people at Davos, of powerful, wealthy men, locked the door and said, sign a pledge, all of you, of $1 billion for my polio initiative, okay? Or you're not getting out of here, all right? Now, Bill would have done that in a very jovial, very friendly way, but he got his money, all right? That's how it works. Couldn't get his wife elected, though. Anyway, okay. This is another important source of their power. They sit on each other's boards of directors. Okay, some of you are shaking your head. You get it, okay? They know your business, you know their business, you know that guy's business, he knows yours, okay? And this, okay, these two, as far as boards of directors, as far as, again, being in the center of the spider web, this is Mr. Diamond. He, other than Bill Clinton, is probably the most powerful man in the world, all right, because he's in charge of the biggest bank in the world, Morgan Stanley, okay? And his sidekick here in crime, literally and figuratively, is Lloyd Blankfein, and Lloyd Blankfein is the CEO of what bank? Anybody? Goldman Sachs, okay? And you and I, personally, are responsible for the fact that these two characters are still in business. They took our world not just to the edge of destruction in 2007, they took it over the side. They laid the entire financial system of the world on its back by the amount of risk they took with their depositors' assets and with simply the corporation itself by loading themselves up in derivatives, okay? We will revisit them a number of times before the morning is up. But this is who they are. Okay, moving right along here. All right, this is, we're coming to the end of this section in terms of who are the corporate elite, all right? The global elite, excuse me. All right, this is a study that I came across, found fascinating. It was a study done by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, and they studied relationships. Remember that we ended here with people sitting on each other's boards, the directors, okay? Relationship between 37 million companies and investors. And what they concluded was, out of that focus group of 37 million companies, really, the power lay in only 147 mega corporations around the world. And inside the 147, they control 40% of this group and 40% of the world economy, okay? Having said that, inside that group, the top 20 in this group are Morgan Stanley, Barclays, and Goldman Sachs. These two characters. Okay? So it's the bankers who are running the world, and out of the universe of bankers, it's these two. It's Morgan Stanley and it's Salomon Brothers. Okay? As I said, they almost single-handedly sabotaged the world's financial system 10 years ago, and they are standing like right there at the edge of doing exactly the same thing again.
Why do they do that? Doesn't it hurt
Power and money, because they can. And because the government that bailed them out, that decided, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this right now, that decided that we were going to resuscitate them, okay, is still of the same mindset, that they deserve to be resuscitated. Okay, good question. Did you ever, what Vicki asked was why? Why did we bail them out? Okay? And if you play this through in your mind, had we not bailed them out, we'd be in an entirely different place today as a world. Okay, it would have been messy, very messy. But not as messy as it's going to be next time. All right? Okay. I think this is here. Okay, so let me read something to you. This is probably the best description of, I've been trying to come up with metaphors in terms of how they work, whether it's the spider web, whether it's the Oilboil network or whatever. This is really how they work. This is an article written by David Rothkopf, who is this author. And he is interviewing Tim Geithner. Tim Geithner, if you recall, was the Treasury Secretary he was chairman of the New York Fed, okay, and then our Secretary of Treasury under Barack Obama, okay? Now, what Geithner is saying, being a successful central banker now depends on what Geithner calls convening power. Okay, this is access in action. Okay, this is the network in action. Convening power that is separate from the formal authority of our institution, the central bank, and which can be a very powerful tool. Speaking to Geithner while I was doing the research for this book, he sketched in fascinating detail how the world's power elite rallies when the markets quake. Recalling an earlier crisis in global securities, and I'm pretty sure it was the collapse of this hedge fund that was managed supposedly by the masters of the universe, global financial management that crashed in the late 90s and set the markets askew. I'm pretty sure that's what he's talking about. Recalling an earlier crisis in global securities markets that he helped manage, Geithner said the Fed brought together the leaders of the world's 14 major financial firms. Okay? Now it's interesting that this book was written to describe the settling out of the 2007 financial crisis. And it mentions 13 bankers, okay? I'm just saying, all right? So the leaders of the world's 14 major financial firms from 5 countries representing 95% of all the activity in global markets, okay? These 14 major bankers. No Asians were there, not even the Japanese. Goldman Sachs chairman Lloyd Blankfein jokingly called the group the 14 families, like the Godfather. And we said to them, we being Tim Geithner, you guys have got to fix this. Okay, now remember, this was a hedge fund that went under. And now these are individual private banks, okay? And the markets are in chaos. And he's saying, as chairman of the New York Fed, you guys have got to fix this problem. Tell us how you're going to fix it, and we will work out some basic regime to make sure there are no free riders, to give you comfort. You know that if you move individually, everybody else will move with you. And they did, just like they did in 2007. Okay, now, here's where it gets profound. There was nothing in writing. There were no rules, no formal process. And while no one asked the Fed to act, the Fed let everyone in the markets know it was acting. The Fed doesn't have control over the stock markets. Okay, should have nothing to do with the stock markets. The beauty of the process, okay, and this is what is describing the phenomenon of the global elite, okay? The beauty of the process was its absolute efficiency, seeing what a tight circle of large firms with global reach could get done fast, with an executive committee of only 4 of them running the weekly conference calls until the crisis was passed. Okay, here it comes. There is no, this is globalization, okay? This is how it works. There is no formal mechanism we could have used to force this on anybody. So we had to invent it, okay? This is how our world is being run today. They're literally making this up as they go along, okay? We had to invent it. I think the premise, this is Tim Geithner talking, I think the premise going forward is that you have to have a borderless, collaborative process. It does not mean it has to be universal. Every jurisdiction or every institution, says Geithner, you just need a critical mass of the right players. It is a very concentrated world. Okay? So we elect presidents and senators and kings and queens and whatever we think we're doing to control what goes on in the world. And it's literally small groups of these incredibly powerful people who are making up our world as they go along. Remember, what we saw there is the majority of the world now is not ruled by jurisdictions. It's transnational corporations that exceed the boundaries of countries that have rules. So the majority of activity, economic, whatever, takes place without anybody being in charge. And these people step in and take charge, okay? And what they are, as we will see, what makes them more and more efficient is when they can winnow down the real core of power to just a small group of people, okay? Because it's more efficient. You don't have to check with the electorate or with the Congress or with the president or with your mother-in-law, okay? You just make the decision among the 4 or 5 of you that this is the way the world's going to run, okay? Either we're going to let the financial markets collapse or we're going to bring them back up and we'll let them collapse again. Okay, that's how, that's the real world today, okay? We have to take off the glasses that say, this is a world that we knew for the last 50 years that we thought we were a part of and we thought we understood, okay? And we've got to put on the glasses that it's almost unrecognizable from what is really happening, okay? And this book then that describes how they brought about the toxic asset relief program that you and I bought all the subprime mortgages, remember that? Okay? And resuscitated the dead banks, all right? Almost an identical description of how it worked. Okay, they got together, only it was Hank Paulson. Remember, Hank Paulson was Secretary of the Treasury in 2007 under George Bush, rather than Tim Geithner. But it was the same process. Come together, what are you going to do? What are you willing to do? Okay, you're going to buy Lehman, you're going to buy Merrill, you're going to buy Bear Stearns, you're going to merge those together, and you're going to call yourselves Bank XYZ, Wachovia, you're out of business. They literally sliced and diced the financial world to keep it going for themselves. Now, we kind of came along for the ride, but we paid for it. As taxpayers, we bought all the bad stuff to enable them to do it. And here's what these authors are saying, is we're within inches of exactly the same thing happening again. Because what happened in 2007 is like, who was it? There's some comedian who's always going to have the big one. Remember the big one? Sanford and Sons or something, I don't know. We had the big one. It was called the financial crisis of 2007, and we died. Okay? We gave ourselves a heart transplant, resuscitated the thing. But the understanding was you weren't going to do this anymore, okay? The reason you had the big one was because you were 300 pounds overweight, you didn't exercise, you didn't have a good diet, and guess what? 10 years later, and I'm going to give you the actual numbers of what we've managed to do over the 10 years as far as reforming these guys, okay? The understanding is if we bail you out, if we do this, because Hank Paulson, that whole administration, they were sticking their neck out. It had never been done before in the history of the world. Governments do not resuscitate private business. They let private businesses fail, okay? That is what is called capitalism, okay? Governments don't nationalize private industry. We did that. So these guys' necks were sticking way out there, and they got the promises from the big boys that, oh, we aren't going to do that anymore. Okay? So here we are 10 years later. We've added another 200 pounds, all right? We've not moved off the couch for 10 years. We're eating Cheetos 24 hours a day. Why would we, and I mean, think about this. Think if this was Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie had the big one 10 years ago. And you go to visit him, you're like, Charlie, you're going to die. Okay, this is not anything that can have a happy ending here. All right, because nothing has changed. Okay, and that's what we're dealing with. This process happening again. All right. So again, this concept of convergence, trying to narrow and narrow and narrow the groups who are really calling the shots, because that's the most efficient way to get things done quickly. And you don't account to anybody. Nobody's going to come back later and say, you didn't do that right, because nobody elected them, nobody appointed them. As he said, there's no rules. Nothing was written down. The entire financial system was resuscitated, and it was not a word put on paper. Okay, here is the big con, all right, well, let me just go through this. Okay, this is how the elite, this is how they got started. And Lori, forgive me, because you hate when I go into ancient history, but it does actually. Lori's like, yes, I'll come, but please don't give me a bunch of history. But unfortunately, none of this stuff just came about by spontaneous combustion. All right, and if we're really going to understand these people in order to construct a countervailing force, we do have to understand how they pulled this off, okay? And this is an article out of The Guardian, which is like the New York Times, but it's in London. An article that this fellow wrote in 2007, George Monbiot, and I actually have George's book somewhere in there. He is a very effective reporter. And what he's saying, he's talking about the UK right now. He's saying, our consumer debt exceeds our total gross national product. In the United States, they found 77,000 road bridges are in the same perilous state as the one that just collapsed in Mississippi. After Hurricane Katrina, 120,000 people still don't have homes. A runaway climate change approach as governments refuse to take necessary action, booming inequality, and now we have this financial crisis. And he's saying these problems appear unrelated, but they all have something in common. They arise in a large part from a meeting that took place 71 years ago in a Swiss spa resort. No, that's not the right button. That's it, Mount Pelerin. Okay, Doug, you and I probably wandered through it in Switzerland on our way. And the group that formed, if I can get this to go back. Oh, that's right, I'm supposed to, thank you. That's why you keep saying point there. Okay, there it is, all right. It laid the foundation for a philosophy of government that is responsible for many, perhaps most of our contemporary crises. When the Mount Pelerin Society first met in 1947, the political project did not have a name yet, but it knew where it was going. The society's founder, Friedrich von Hayek, and I can get you his picture right there, that's Friedrich. Okay, and this is Hotel du Lac where the meeting actually took place. This is not fake news, in other words. Okay, these things really happen. Remarked that the battle for the ideas would take at least a generation. Okay, and it's the generation of the baby boomers. Okay, baby boomers were born starting in 1947, and we're, now kind of at the end of their run, but they've passed all this on. But he knew that the intellectual army would attract powerful backers. Its philosophy, which later became known as neoliberalism, accorded with the interests of the ultra-rich. And so the ultra-rich would pay for it. Okay, actually, a professor at the University of Notre Dame, where I went to school, has written a book about this thick, about nothing other than the Mount Pelerin Society, okay? Because it's still very active. Now, here is their dogma, this is their ideology, and I've talked about it before. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We've talked about it at the last seminar. It is called neoliberalism because the real liberalism, the concept of free markets, was developed by Adam Smith, the first true economist in 1776. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. And at that time, governments had an iron grasp on markets. And his new idea at that point was take the iron fist off, let markets flow, let supply and demand distribute goods. You don't have to over-regulate, okay? He called that the invisible hand. Just let markets flow and let individual participants act on their own behalf, okay? The term was act in their own interest, their own best interest. And the markets will be robust. Okay. Almost immediately, that book was misinterpreted. And it's certainly misinterpreted by these people, and probably intentionally. What he meant by letting market participants act in their own best interest, and he even mocked the people who had criticized his book for misinterpreting it like this. He said, of course I meant that in your own best interest, you would take care of your community and the commons. All right? Why would it be in your own best interest to make a lot of money and destroy the community in which you live? All right? So these folks have co-opted, it's called neoliberalism. They have co-opted his emphasis on free markets, making government take their hand off of it. All right? But they've distorted this aspect of selfishness. All right? That's not what he meant. He meant, yeah, take care of yourself, but part of taking care of yourself is not polluting the heck out of the planet and driving people into poverty and, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the Pellerin Society, neoliberalism, is a version of liberalism, but it's a corrupted vision. All right, so these are their beliefs, and I'm going to go through these quickly because you're very familiar with. Because this is the system by which we all operate today, okay? We have all drunk the neoliberal Kool-Aid. We all believe this is the way markets should run. All right, so basically, rule of the market, liberating free enterprise, private enterprise from any bonds imposed by the government, no matter how much social damage this causes. Reduce wages by deunionizing workers, eliminating worker rights. They've been won over many years of struggle. To convince us this is good, they say an unregulated market is the best way to increase, this is trickle-down economics, right? Totally let the wealthy do what they want, the big corporations make as much money as they want, and it will benefit everybody. It will trickle down to the lower classes, okay? Reagan's supply side trickled down, but somehow the wealth didn't. All right, and it basically legitimizes greed. All right, now, I'm the first one to say governments can overdo it. Governments certainly can overregulate. All right, 2 years ago, I had a regulator from the SEC living in my office trying to find something to cite me on, okay? I thought that was somewhat government overreach. She didn't find anything, by the way. My client should be happy to know. All right. But so, yes, of course governments can overdo it. The challenge for democracy for every generation is to strike the right balance between government control and free enterprise. All right. Neoliberalism says the best role for government is no government at all, essentially. Get out of our way and let us do what we want, and everybody will be better off. All right, this is the next tenet, is cutting public expenditures for social services like education and healthcare, reducing the safety net for the poor and even maintenance of roads and water supply, again, in the name of reducing government's role. Of course, they don't oppose government subsidies and tax benefits for business. All right, we're seeing this happen as we speak, okay? What's going on in our Congress today is basically an orgy of neoliberalism. They're cutting everything they can possibly cut, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. All right, now here is the ideology part of it, these men literally believe. Now, it's hard to tell whether they really believe it or they just pretend to, but they believe that because they are so successful, all right, even though they inherited most of their money, but because they are successful, they must be above the rest of us. They don't need to worry about taking care of other people, okay? That's not their problem, all right? And they shouldn't have to pay taxes repeatedly, have their earnings reduced for these losers, okay, who didn't manage to rise to their levels of wealth. If you, and I think I have a couple slides from now, a picture of Newt Gingrich, okay, who ran for office in the 90s. And do you remember the term contract with America? Remember that? He ran on that platform that the contract was going to be, again, cutting more government away, blah, blah, blah. But the language in it is almost word for word neoliberalism. It emphasizes individuals' responsibility. Okay, everybody is responsible for themselves. And if you made bad choices, okay, if you happen to be born brain damaged, all right, or blind, that was a really bad choice that you made, okay? But I shouldn't have to take care of you for the rest of your life just because I have a lot of money, okay? So in their minds, that actually makes sense, and they really do feel that they are a breed apart, okay? And this is where this term entitlement comes from, okay, that I'm sure you've all heard bandied about. They feel they are entitled to not have to obey the same rules, not have to pay the same taxes, and to free themselves from the responsibility to run a society, okay? So again, deregulation, reduce government regulation on anything that could diminish profits. All of the environmental regulations that are now being rolled back are being rolled back for the reason that, well, they diminish profits, okay? If we have to put filters on our smokestacks or not dump refuse, radioactive refuse directly into the waterway, that's going to cost us extra money, okay? And we are entitled to not, the Koch brothers, the business model for the Koch brothers, whom you all know, all right, is they refuse to obey any environmental regulations across all of their industry, okay? Because it eats into their profits and they're entitled to that. Privatization, this is something that has happened over our lifetime, okay, is the shift of, and if you remember, it's interesting, when the USSR fell apart in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, and Vladimir Putin stepped in. The first thing he did was privatize state industries, state assets. And immediately, out of the ashes of the USSR, rose about 10 oligarchs, okay, who just kind of by accident ended up owning everything that prior to that had been property of the state, okay? And of course, Vladimir didn't get any benefit from that himself. We realize that. Vladimir Putin, depending on who and what you read, some people say that Vladimir Putin is the wealthiest man in the world. And it's because of that. He literally raided the treasury of an entire nation. Okay, so this privatization thing, yeah, it includes banks, key industries, tollways, electricities, hospitals, fresh water, usually done in the name of greater efficiency. Okay, private enterprise can do it better than the government. Eliminating this concept of public good or community, replacing it with individual responsibility, pressuring the poorest people in society to find solutions to their lack of health care, education, social security by themselves, then blaming if they fail, they're lazy. Okay, all these people that can't get health care, I mean, for heaven's sakes, what is their problem? Individual is more important than society. Okay, that's the kernel there, all right? That the right of a successful individual to function free of any government regulation is more important than the good of the society as a whole. Shareholder capitalism. Corporations are only responsible to their shareholders, not society. So in other words, what we fostered in the first 40 years in this, after the World War, was the idea that corporations were members of the community. Okay, they're employees came from the community, their products were sold into the community, they were good citizens. That's what defined a good corporation. That's all gone by the wayside. And that started pretty much in the 90s, the idea that, oh, no. We've got to make a profit for the benefit of our shareholders. And all the rest of this stuff, fair wages and not polluting and all that, we can't be bothered. All right. Okay, this is a book by David Harvey, who is a political scientist, proposes in his book, it's called A Brief History of Neoliberalism. Wherever the neoliberal program has been implemented, it has caused a massive shift in wealth, not just to the top 1%, but to the top 10th of 1%. The conditions that neoliberalism demands in order to free human beings from the slavery of the state, which is minimal taxes, dismantling public services, social security, breaking of unions, just happen to be the conditions required to make the elite even richer, while leaving everyone else to sink or swim. In practice, the philosophy developed at Mount Pelerin is little more than an elaborate guise for a wealth grab. It is also, and this is my doing here, it's also dead wrong. Okay, this species that we can't escape, we happen to be social beings. All right, so developing economic models and economic science based on the fact that we aren't, that we are these freestanding entities that don't need to support one another, it's crazy. Okay? And speaking of crazy, every time you read about a mass killer and they look into his life, how are they described? Loners. They're all loners. Okay? Healthy members of the society do knit together. We are a society. Okay? It's just like a herd of horses. You cannot take an individual horse out of the herd and isolate it. It will die. They are herd animals. And same thing with orca whales. Okay, you cannot take an orca out of its pod. It cannot survive. And we are the same. We first knit together in families, and we had clans, and we had tribes, and we formed nations. All right, this is the way human beings thrive. And this philosophy is putting lipstick on a pig. Okay, it's covering over a wealth grab, a society that a belief system that basically only benefits a very few people. All right, but somehow putting the lipstick on so that it looks, well, I guess that makes sense. Allowing billionaires to just keep making billions of money and not having to pay taxes. You know, there's some, if I were a billionaire, yeah, probably I wouldn't want to pay taxes. All right? It can't last. It's not sustainable. Okay, it's worked very well for this group of people for the last 70 years. But look at where it has ended society as a whole. Okay, this guy we talked about, Margaret Margaret made the famous statement when Ronald visited and they had a joint press conference that there is no such, quote, there is no such thing as society. We are only a collection of individuals. That's what Margaret believed. And so did Mr. Reagan. Okay, now these two, all right, there you have it. The poster boys for neoliberalism today. And like I said, they're literally having an orgy of neoliberalism. They are cutting every aspect of the social safety net that we have established through FDR, okay, which was Social Security, and what is it? You know, when you're injured.
Medicare.
No, not that. When you're injured, you continue to earn wages, whatever that's called. Workman's comp. Workman's comp. There you go. So FDR established workman's comp and Social Security, and then FDR, or excuse me, LBJ established Medicare and Medicaid, all right, as well as the Civil Rights Act. And the interesting, you know, what's really not right about this, those programs were based on Keynesian economics, and I've talked about this in prior seminars, so I'll just make this quick. Keynes lived during the Great Depression, and what he saw was this was a time when government could be of help. It should start work programs, okay, which is what FDR ended up doing for people who are out of work. And it wasn't just to be nice. What he realized is if you construct this social safety net under a society, it means that when people do lose their job or do become injured, they don't fall all the way to the bottom. They don't fall out of the system, okay? They are supported by the economy until they can get back on their feet, and then they become contributing members again, paying taxes like everybody else, okay? You tear that social safety net away, and then you have very productive people falling straight to the bottom when they've had bad luck, and they can't crawl back up on their own, all right? So all of these social welfare systems aren't just to be nice, okay? It's society taking care of its own, and it was just as if they were members of your family. If you were all living in, let's say, an extended family like they used to in the 1930s and 40s, and you're all farming the land or doing something productive, and one of you got injured, you wouldn't, you know, put him out in the barn until he got better. All right, you take care of him until he could become productive again. That's social welfare writ large. That's all it is. It's not some insidious plot to take money away from the wealthy. All right, so what we're doing today, what these two characters are involved in, is taking health insurance from children, taking retirement benefits from retired people, and this mania that the major problem in this country today is these immigrants from Mexico. That's our biggest problem. Not really, okay? And if, depending on what phase of history you want to focus on, you know that in truth, a third of this country was part of Mexico, was Mexico. We're the immigrants. Okay, about 150 years ago, half of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, California, and Texas was Mexico. But we don't talk about that, okay? So that's where they are focused. And again, this is part of the neoliberal agenda, is to achieve misdirection, to have us focus on something that is not what they're doing, okay? To have us continually wrapped up in these social issues that have nothing to do with the fact that they are destroying the economy that supports it all. And they've been successful. All right. Okay, I'm gonna flip through this. Okay, so they have this ideology. How did they promulgate it? Well, they funded think tanks, hundreds of think tanks around the world. Okay, I just listed a few. Universities university business departments. They taught neoliberalism as if it were science, okay? So that, well, that's not even right. Okay, many, many foundations, okay? This is just one think tank that I think is particularly poignant. This is something called Americans for Prosperity and is funded by the Koch brothers, all right? And they have something they call the No Climate Tax Pledge. And if you sign that, they will fund your political campaign, all right? If you promise to never vote on any legislation that regulates pollution from fossil fuel industries, they will fund your campaign. And currently, 411 current office holders nationwide have signed this pledge. Signatories include the entire Republican leadership in the House of Representatives.
Big surprise.
All right? A third of the members of the House as a whole, and a quarter of the United States senators. Okay, so that's how these think tanks work. All right, is they are backed by money, okay? And in the think tanks, they develop strategies for marketing neoliberalism is what it comes down to, and you see it on your television in the form of campaign ads. You read it in newspapers and in magazines as justification for taking over. For instance, I don't know if I've got this on here. Probably don't. Let's not go there. Okay, this is another important tool of the neoliberals. It's called, and it's something the author Naomi Klein, who's written she's a reporter. She's researched a lot of this. It's a strategy by which you either create a disaster or you take advantage of a disaster when the public services are stretched to infinity, all right? You step in and say, you know what? We have a private corporation that we're going to take care of this, okay? A good example was Puerto Rico. The entire island was out of electricity. And who did we send down there to begin with? A private company who just happened to be in the same town as Ryan Zinke, who heads the Department of Interior, and it amounted to 2 people. Okay, do everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, and they didn't know what they were doing, but that's how they do it. We now, she's talking here about the Bush administration and the whole war in Iraq. Okay. The war took models to this model of disaster capitalism to new levels. Iraq represented ultimate expression of the project. A war, ultimate shock, fought to largely maximize corporate profits. Okay, 75% of the military in Iraq are private contractors. 75%. You and I are paying public entities to fight that war. And how long has that war been going on?
Almost 20 years.
16 years. The World War II only lasted 4 years, and we conquered the Japanese Empire and the Nazis, okay? But in 16 years, we can't manage to control a group of terrorists, okay? We have no idea how much money that whole war has cost, okay? Because it is off the balance sheet. That's the title that they give it. The estimates you see are at least $1 trillion a year. You and I are paying for it, okay? And we are tolerating it. But this is a very, as she says, it's a very effective strategy. Defines it as full-fledged new economy and homeland security, privatized war, and disaster reconstruction. The fact that we are allowing climate change to destroy so many communities, okay, is a ticket to private enterprise to move in and constantly have to rebuild those communities that are devastated by floods and wars and fires, okay? So climate change is really on the side of the neoliberals. They can make a lot of money off of climate change and permanent war, all right? Nobody, are we debating the war in Iraq at all in Congress? No, we're too busy taking health insurance away from children and deporting those nasty Mexicans. Okay, so Katrina, real quickly. Katrina devastated New Orleans. They used it as an opportunity to essentially take over the public school system and make the public school system that was run primarily by black people, which is the majority of the inhabitants of that portion of New Orleans, and the teachers are all white at this point. But that's just an example of, okay, I'm not going to go into that. This is something that Robert Reich, who's a former Secretary of Labor, is very concerned about, is that the very guts of capitalism and democracy require that the legal system be a level playing field. And what he points out in great detail in his book is area after area where the wealthy have pretty much put their finger on the scales. And whenever the poor come up against the wealthy, they don't have a chance, okay? He feels that's one of the greatest threats to our democracy today. By changing the institutional rules to favor themselves, for example, by closing off competition in markets they already dominate, tilting the playing field ever more steeply in their favor. Okay, this is an article by Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He's pointing out the huge problem we have with monopolies, okay? Also to benefit the wealthy. It's unfair competition when you monopolize any industry, and the government is supposed to regulate that. But we have removed all those regulations so that this has happened, okay? If you look, this is 1995. This is 2009. Okay, in 1995, we had, 50 to 60 individual banks in our country. And throughout these years, they were consolidated and consolidated and consolidated to today, we have 4 banks. Okay, and here's the poster child for the way the banks are run. Wells Fargo, those fine people who opened up millions and millions of fake accounts for their customers. You all know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, okay. So Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and guess who? Jamie Dimon, okay, Morgan Chase, and Citigroup. Lloyd Blankfein isn't in here, Salomon Brothers, because he is, not Salomon Brothers. Thank you, Goldman Sachs. They are they're not a commercial bank, they're mainly an investment bank, or they'd be on here. Okay, so this is a picture of monopoly laws not being enforced. This is a picture of not giving the American public any choice at all in terms of where they go to borrow money or to conduct their financial affairs. And we will see later on that these are the people that benefit from debt. The enormous amount of debt that the world has taken on in the last 10 years benefits these people because we pay interest to them. They hold all the debt, okay? The money is, and this is, I'm going to get into this very quickly, the money is printed by the Federal Reserves, given to the banks to loan out into the society. We buy the products, and they hold the debt over our heads, okay? But it used to be a much larger universe, and now, as I said, think this whole super elite movement is about convergence. It's about getting a smaller and smaller group in charge so that they can control things extremely efficiently. All right. You're being so patient. Okay, I will stop talking any minute now. All right. I hope you're learning. You're feeling that you're learning things. Okay, so this I will go through very quickly. The end result of neoliberalism, okay, upon our economy is to have turned it into the same thing that Vladimir Putin pulled off in Russia. Okay, this is what happened. This is the income, top 1% income share in Russia from 1905 to 2015. Okay, 1905, the Tsar was in charge. They kicked him out. This is the beginning of the Communist Revolution, which ended right about 1985. And gee, look at this. Just magically, all right, the money all floated to the upper 1% who are the oligarchs. All right? Now, we're not an oligarchy. Our picture won't look like that. Will it? Okay, sorry. The green line is us. We're right where the oligarchs are. Okay? The top 1%, okay, holds 20% of the income every year, which is identical to the oligarchy in Russia. This has a different way. This is, again, much of this started when Reagan took office in the 1980s, all right? The 1980s, and we're looking at income gains at the top that dwarf those of low and middle income. So this is percent change in real after-tax income since 1979. Started where we were all about even, all right? And through the 80s, 90s, 2000, the upper 1% was as much as 300%, took as much as 300% more of the income. After the crash, this is the crash here, and now, unfortunately for them, they only get 200% of the annual income. All right, but here's the rest of us, the middle and lower classes. We get 67, 40, 40%. Okay, particularly to this gentleman, Thomas Piketty, who is probably considered the best economist in the world. He wrote this book in 2014, and he is scared to death of a chart like this. He and his group of economists went back over the last now let's talk about boring, over the last 300 years and analyzed what happens to societies when they reach untenable levels of inequality, okay? We're there. And he says the result is quote unquote catastrophe. This is not sustainable. And it's not, and you think, okay, so why? What's going on if we have really, really rich people? Okay, it's because of that finger on the scale, okay? It's because when you get some people for whom the laws don't apply and everything can be, the level playing field is completely tipped in their favor, democracy is destroyed, okay? Democracy requires a level of income that just pretty much looks like this, okay? Not divergence of that to that effect. Okay, this is the distribution of economic growth in the US from 1980 to 2014. It's all gone to the upper 1/10 of 1%. Okay, so here, this is my little way of trying to make this clear. So the last go-around we had with this amount of inequality was the Gilded Age, the robber baron age. You've all heard of that. Okay, I know I'm old, but I actually wasn't alive during this time, okay? I just read about it. And look at the size here. I tried to make this clear. Again, convergence. The number of wealthy people today compared to the number of wealthy people then. It's a much smaller group. So they are much more efficient. And in the robber baron age, the wealthy were 9 times richer than the poorest. Today, the wealthy are 30 times richer than the poorest, okay? That's stunning. And it's unsustainable, all right? This is an historic level of disparity. The income of the top one, not the 1/10 of 1% even, but just the 1%, their average income is $1,300,000. And the average income of the middle and lower classes is around $40,000 to $50,000. That's not a society, okay? That's an oligarchy. All right, and this is what Piketty says, and just bear with me because it's important. I want to be sure I've said it somewhere in this seminar, because this book was sold out before it was even translated into English. He published it in French. It became the #1 bestseller, and it was completely sold out in English before it even reached our shores, okay? Because he's explaining to us what is wrong and what is going to happen. And what is wrong, and this is pretty obtuse, okay, but here it is. What he's saying is whenever you have the inherited wealth, the people like Downton Abbey, right? All those people sat on their ass all day long, right? Mr. whoever he was, Mr. Downton or whatever, was always just sitting at a desk, you know, not really doing anything. Once in a while he went out and checked on the pigs, and that was about it, okay? And remember the lady the grandma, somebody asked her what she was doing for the weekend, and she was like, what's a weekend? Okay, all my days are the same, all right? So these people were completely out of it. And that's what you get when you get generation after generation of inherited wealth, okay? And we're there. Our oligarchs are making about 4 to 5% a year doing absolutely nothing. But that's where they do actually make nothing. But if they're invested in derivatives or something, they're making a lot more than that. But this is all it takes. Because as long as it's more than what the economy as a whole is making, and our economy over the last 10 years has averaged about 1%. That's all the average guy can make. Okay, if GDP isn't 4 to 5%, the average guy can't keep up with these people. Okay, and they just keep getting further and further and further away, and more, they absorb more and more of the assets. And one of his terms in here is the past eats the future. Does that make sense? They're living on past income. They've inherited it, and now they're growing it. But it's absorbing more and more of the wealth in the society. And at a certain point, there's nothing left to buy, okay, or to make. And we're there, okay? And this is what sold this book, is his insight, and well-documented insight. If you want your eyes to cross, you know, read the book, but it's very well done. But he cites example after example after example over the last 300 years where this has happened. And when private wealth dwarfs national income, catastrophe follows. Okay, that's why I'm giving this seminar, you guys. Okay, the evidence is piling up that we have to know what the heck is going on here, okay? This is not fake news, all right? Nobody who consumes fake news would take the time to read this, number one. Okay. Oh, I just blocked out the, okay. So, all right. This is where you will lose your lunch, because we're going to start talking about your portfolios. What is the financial system that our neoliberal friends have left us with? Okay? Bear with me here, I'm repeating something from the last seminar, but again, we've got to set the stage here. Okay. After the war, 1945, the world leaders got together, mainly under the aegis of General Marshall, who was pretty much running the world at the end of the Second World War, and they established the gold standard. All right, you didn't have a dollar in circulation unless there was a dollar of gold in Fort Knox or wherever. All right, and that creates a steady state economy. In other words, if there's only so much money in circulation, okay, it will change hands. Sectors will expand and contract, goods will flow, all right? But the size of the economy itself, the amount of money moving through it, and particularly the amount of money that can be borrowed, all right, has a lid on it. So we thrived in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But in 1971, the banking industry came to Richard Nixon and said, listen, how are we going to get a bigger piece of this pie? We've got to make more than just the difference between what we're paying our CD depositors and what we're getting in on loans, which is about 4%. All right, we want to speculate. We want a bigger piece of this pie. So they took us, Richard Nixon, unilaterally, we were the only country in the world that got off the gold standard in 1971. And the result was an explosion of money, okay? The businesses use this exponential growth model as though this were science, okay? All it was the Federal Reserve printing money, giving it to the banks to loan out. And the invention of one other very important little thing that we all live on now. Credit, exactly. We didn't have credit in 1960. You either wrote a check and had money in the bank, or you had cash. That was it, okay? This was their intentional. They knew that this is like giving sugar to a kid, okay? Of course you're going to charge up to the limit, okay? So of course they're going to have all these loans now that people are paying interest in again and again and again, okay? Right up to whatever the limit is you are allowing them to borrow. So that worked right up to 2008 until we reached a debt limit. That people no longer, they borrowed all the money out of their houses, remember that? Home equity, home equity loans, okay? My house is, it's worth $400,000. Yeah, but how much real, yeah, it's worth, no, it's market value. How much real equity do you have in it? How much have you paid down your mortgage? Okay, that's equity, the difference between what you have left in your mortgage and what the fair market value is. People didn't even understand that. They thought if the fair market value was $400,000, they had $400,000 in their pocket. Okay, again, we all drank the Kool-Aid. Okay, of course I can afford a new car. Of course I can borrow money to buy a new car. Okay, because I have $400,000 in equity. All right, this all should be taught in grade school, not even high school. It should be taught in grade school. And there's a reason it isn't, because we're chumps. Okay, it was just too easy for them. So, all right, so we hit the debt wall. We couldn't borrow any more money. And theoretically, we really did hit the climate wall. Climate scientists say 2008 was probably our last chance to get a handle on climate change, to stop it from the climate from reaching tipping points, which we are seeing now with class 5 hurricanes and mega fires in California. Okay, we're still fighting battles, but the war's been lost. Okay, and like I said, they're fine with that. They can make money off of repairing the damage that storms make. All right. Okay, this isn't that amazing? This is 1970s. Here's where Ronald Reagan took office. Just by this. Now, what I'm going to be dealing with going forward is world information, the world financial markets. But this is just what happened in the United States. Okay, the level of debt that we took on from 1980, okay, is the level of debt to GDP, which is what we produce in a country. Okay, GDP is like our wages. It's the combined amount of goods and services produced. The level of that to debt is 350%. Our debt is 350% of our GDP. That's astonishing. And again, not sustainable. Okay, who's going to continue to loan money to some, if your credit record looked like this, okay, who's going to loan you money? Did you get 5 other new jobs, okay, to continue to pay interest on this? All right, no. So, okay, so woo. All right. So after 2008, and let me make sure I'm here. Yeah, okay, so here was the plan. We bailed them out. We gave the bankers a heart transplant. And the understanding was they were going to stop lending money. All right, they were going to let people pay off the loans they had, and the economy would get smaller. The amount of money moving around the economy, particularly in the form of debt, would contract. All right, now it was going to be painful. All right, people were not going to be able to buy a new car every single year, as they've trained us to do. Okay, but it would have gotten us back to eventually a steady state economy. And many people today say that's going to be the solution, is we've got to get back on the gold standard. We've got to get a handle, okay, on the masters of the universe so they don't keep printing money, okay? And in a minute, I'll talk about who do they have printing all the money for them. All right. Okay. Just look at here we are. So here was the level of debt. This is in 1980 when Ronald took over. We had not even $1 trillion in debt. Okay? We had $900 billion in debt. And within 37 years, we ran up 142 trillion, and that's when the crash happened. And then we were supposed to reduce the debt. And did we? We added another about $100 trillion in debt after the crash. So this is Uncle Arnold, who had the big one, was supposed to lose weight, okay? And here he is 10 years later, and we're expecting that he's not going to have another big one? If the conditions are absolutely, well, actually they're worse than in 2007. Okay. Yeah, forget that, that's just, okay, so here we are. You've seen this at the end of the last seminar, but it's worse, okay, because the numbers are bigger, all right? So basically, this is what our financial system is composed of. We have $37 trillion in world bonds. Those are investments. That's actually, oh, we all stop and all stare at Vicki now when she turns her phone. Turns her phone off. All right. These are investments, as are world stocks, even though the market at 26,000 doesn't really represent investing. It's a lot of algorithmic risk-taking, let's just leave it at that. But we'll call it an investment, 76 trillion. And then about the same amount in GDP, okay? This is the amount now of world debt, public and private. It's really, and this is where the instability comes in, it's zombie economics, all right? up to the point of 2007, we believed in free market fundamentalism. The markets will take care of us. Just let the corporate experts run the businesses of the world and it will take care of us. That was all debunked by the crash of 2007, all right? By the amount of debt that they took on in their banks, they were insolvent, and in the level of financial derivatives, which are just wagers, okay, that they engaged in with their depositors' money. Okay, so that economic system lost all credibility in 2007. Anyone who actually understood what happened, okay, knows that this is kind of like, you know, the story of the emperor's new clothes, right? Everybody's kind of shaking your head, okay. The emperor who has all the power is walking around naked, but in his deranged mind, he thinks he's got these zippy new clothes, right? And his subjects, who are so cowed by him, are saying, oh, your new clothes are wonderful, your new, okay, so that's zombie economics, all right? We all know these people don't know how to run the world, and yet we're comfortable just kind of getting by with whatever it is they're doing and believing in them, because they are so powerful and they are so rich. I mean, I don't know how many conversations I've had, not with you folks, but with my friends, people that I meet, various, is that, well, you know, they're good businessmen, all right? These successful businessmen know what they're doing, right? I mean, we all kind of want to think that. And what they're doing is what Tim Geithner describe here. They're just inventing it as they go along. They have no idea what the consequences of this is, okay? There is no end game here, all right? They don't have any plan to pay off the debt. And as if this weren't bad enough, all right. Okay. On top of all of that is balanced now $1 quadrillion in financial derivatives. Okay. And you all know what financial derivatives are, right? Because I have been talking about them nonstop since the crisis. But just to refresh your mind, am I okay? Oh no, I can't have to go back. Okay. These aren't investments. This is not showing you that there is $1 quadrillion invested in anything, okay? These are wagers. $1 quadrillion is being wagered every day by the banks. You can see the top US banks have $222 trillion exposure to this, all right? What derivatives are, and again, they are unregulated. Nobody tells them how to do it, what to do. They're not accountable. Okay, if they send the world over the cliff again, they're not responsible. A derivative means that, and it's usually the investment bankers, they bring two counterparties together. They arrive at amount they're willing to bet. It's called a notional amount. Could be $1 million, could be $1 billion, could be $1 trillion. All right? And then they contract for that amount. They set a date, say by March 5th, and the bet is that interest rates will be at 2.25 on the 30-year Treasury, okay? And on that date, what did I say, March 30th, something? Okay. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. Now, the really crazy part is as soon as they made that debt, let's say it was $1 billion, both of them went back and entered that amount on their balance sheet. Okay? Warren Buffett just wrote an article. Well, actually, it's in his annual report to his investors, pointing out how absolutely insane that is. Only one of them is going to come out with the billion, and yet they both have already posted that as earnings. Okay. They post no collateral. So on that day, and this is what happened in 2007, on the day that one of them has to come up with $1 billion, if they cannot, all right, they set off a chain reaction across the world. Okay, if it's a big enough player, if it's a big enough amount, this is how interconnected the banking system is, okay? What is scary is not these big dark lines. What's scary is all of the smaller connections. It's like a ball of rubber bands, okay? All intertwined. And that is our financial system, our worldwide financial system. They're all involved in the derivative markets, and they all, as soon as they made that bet of $1 billion, they immediately made 5 other bets on what they were going to do with that billion once they won. Okay? And then, of course, they've got 37 other derivative contracts going on where they've bet other billions, and they've committed themselves to a whole network of other billion-dollar contracts. All right? This is insane. Okay, this is greed, this is mania. This is what you end up with when you've taken greed to a level of madness. Okay, because if you look at this, who's benefiting from this model? Okay, the people that have the biggest circle, and that's the banks. Everybody owes the banks. So they literally do run the world. And as we heard, they run this thing one day at a time. They just invent it as they go along. Nobody's ever had an economic model like this before because there's never been this amount of money in the world. All right? Everyone who testified at the congressional hearings after the collapse in 2007, everyone, including Robert Bookstaber, who was the first inventor of a derivative, everyone said, you've got to shut this market down, make it illegal. Okay, Warren Buffett calls it a financial weapon of mass destruction. Yeah. Financial derivatives are weapons of mass destruction in the financial markets. They're just, in this recent annual report, he referred to them as time bombs. Okay? It's just a matter of time before this whole unregulated mess, there's no transparency. At the end of the day, unlike the Dow, we know it went up 100 points or down 100 points. No one, including the players, has any idea what's going on other than with their own contracts. Okay. And interestingly enough, okay, remember Lloyd Blankfein? Okay. 50% of Goldman Sachs revenue is made by trading derivatives. That's all you need to know. Okay. The 2 largest banks in the world are Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. And one of them makes 50% of their revenue from trading unregulated, crazy risk level derivatives. All right. And this is why I keep you in bonds, okay? This is why we are invested in these. And that the only way we participate in the stock market is being hedged not up to our ears, about up to our waist, okay? We cannot afford to play unhedged with these characters. All right. Oh, no, I think we have more to go. Okay. I'm going to read something to you that I am not really sure of. But the question that begs to be asked is, where's the money coming from? Okay, where, when we had that explosion in the size of the economy, and then we were supposed to contract it, and then we exploded again, who's printing all this money? Who's telling them to do this? All right? Whoever them are. All right, so the only explanation that I was able to come up with in researching this, and we're nearly done, folks, okay? We're winding down here to solutions, but at any rate. This is an article based on, it's written by a Canadian research group that researches globalization. And they are interviewing someone who, a woman, Karen Hudes, is a graduate of Yale Law School. She worked inside the World Bank as senior counsel for 10 years. Senior counsel in the World Bank for 10 years. Okay? And this is what she has to say. The global elite dominate the unelected, unaccountable organizations that control the finances of virtually every nation on the face of the planet. The World Bank, the IMF, and the central banks, such as the Federal Reserve, literally control the creation and flow of money worldwide. At the apex of this system is the Bank of International Settlements. Anybody heard of the Bank of International Settlements? Okay, I actually have, because I read all this stuff all the time, but not in this context. They do get, they publish reports. Okay, it is the central bank of all central banks. And posted below is a video, okay. And what she says is the Bank of International Settlements is an extremely important organization. And it is literally immune to the laws of national governments. She talks about these global economy meetings that are held in Basel, which is the headquarters of the Bank of International Settlements. During those meetings, decisions are made that affect every man, woman, and child on the planet. Yet none of us have any say in what goes on. The Bank for International Settlements is an organization that was founded by the global elite, and it operates for the benefit of the global elite. And it is intended to be one of the key cornerstones of the emerging one world economic system. That's the part I'm not really comfortable with. I haven't come across any discussion that these folks are trying to form a one world economic system, and yet in a way they already have. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, this book. Okay. This book was written by one of the most respected historians, and it was written in 1966. Okay? Carol Quigley from Harvard. Okay? I didn't read all of this. I read a lot of it, okay, but not all of it. And there's a quote from him. In 1966, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Everybody should understand that. Central banks are not government entities. They are private organizations. So the answer to the question where all the money is coming from, okay, appears to be this bank. I mean, it's kind of obvious. If this is the central bank of all central banks, and we have created a system that is overwhelmed by debt, okay, that just didn't happen by accident. All right, now, what they're going to do with it is probably going to happen by accident. They've made all their billions now, all right? They've accomplished their agenda. They control the governments of the world, all right? One would say, why are we allowing, and one of the constant issues that's referred to in among these writers is, why don't we break up the big banks? They caused the financial crisis. Alan Greenspan says, it's as clear as the nose on your face. They've got to be broken up. If they're too big to fail, they're too big. Okay? Well, the answer is they own the government. All right? America isn't a country, it's a company. And our legislators that we think we're, electing are employees of the banking system. And what to me is clear is the reason they've allowed it to reach this insane level of instability is they've been promised another bailout. Okay? Uncle Frank, or whoever he was, knows he's going to get another heart transplant. Otherwise, why would he? Well, we know why, why people gain other hundreds of pounds. But, again, in 2007, this whole house of cards collapsed. So we know what happens when this is allowed to remain in place. We've been through it. Why would you create it all over again if you didn't know that, again, you would not be held accountable? Am I wrong? Huh? Doesn't that make the most sense? Because what happens when you continually print more and more and more money is currency collapse. If there is so much of anything, if there's more corn in the world than any cows can consume, the value of corn goes down, all right? And if there's too much of any commodity in circulation, its value goes down. And these people need the dollar. They need a currency to, buy their Learjets and fly run their yachts, etc. So they are invested in keeping the dollar sound. We certainly are. And to allow it to get to this extreme, they must know something that we don't know. And the only thing I can come up with is it's going to be a repeat of the last time. Okay. Solutions. All right. what these folks are saying is the only way we're going to get out of this mess of having a global economy without global governance is we're going to have to create the governance. We have 68,000 international organizations, okay, that, as David Rothkopf says, are either dysfunctional or they're weak and dysfunctional, okay? Like the United Nations. The United Nations doesn't do anything. If they did, the war in Syria would be over, and so would the war in Iraq. All right? So what nations are going to have to do, can I turn this off? Oh, sorry, yeah, right there. Yeah, there we go, okay. What they say is, what nations are going to have to do is cede, C-E-D-E, okay, as in give up, part of their national sovereignty and empower an international governance, not government. Nobody wants one government. We're all terrified of that, okay? But we've got to have an entity that can orchestrate things like the international monetary system, all right? Where's my friend Piketty? I don't know where I left him somewhere around here. Oh, okay, all right, thank you. Thomas Piketty says, what we have to do is institute a global wealth tax. All right, if people are making $1 billion a year, they're making $1 billion, they don't have $1 billion, they're making $1 billion a year. So that means they probably have multi-billions and they're not paying any taxes. They've found all the loopholes, they're not paying it in this country, they're paying it over here where they don't really get taxed, et cetera, et cetera. He says we need a global banking entity that knows where the money is and taxes these people, all right? That's the only way we're going to get their money under control, okay? Al Gore, for decades, has been saying we need a global carbon tax. The only way we're going to stop pollution is to tax the polluters for the degree of damage they do to our planet. They now pay nothing, okay? All of these storms that happened last year, the bill should go to ExxonMobil. Think about that, okay? The reason the oceans are warming is because of the fossil fuel industry, and they are scot-free. So the people need to give up some, and the only hopeful aspect of this is there are nations who are already on this, okay? The Scandinavian nations, Germany, Northern European, have already come together in the interest of controlling climate change, and that may be our salvation because that is indeed a global issue. We cannot harness climate change city by city, state by state, or country by country. It truly has to be a global enterprise, okay? So what all of these authors, these experts are saying is that we need to truly start thinking of ourselves as global citizens as opposed to German and American and Venezuelan, okay? Because in reality, the nation-state system is obsolete anyway. Doesn't work that way anymore, okay? But as long as our leaders can keep us thinking that we really have control over this nation that we belong to, when the majority of economic activity is happening around the world under the auspices of people we don't know. Okay, so what I think I probably can't retrieve it. The last slide, if I can reactivate this, I won't bother, is knowledge. okay? Am I getting anything? Oh, I actually have. Okay, so I will. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm flipping through some other possible solutions. Would it be possible, do you think, to get more female leaders? Wouldn't that help a little bit? Okay, women are just better at getting along, but never mind, it'll never happen. Okay, but this is the last resort. People have to be getting together in meetings like this. You have to talk to your friends and family about it. You have to explain it to your areas of influence, all right? Because literally, we are still looking through rose-colored glasses that are
50 years out of date.
exactly 60 years old. Okay, your children and your grandchildren are never going to think of themselves as Americans or Venezuelans or whatever. They're going to think of themselves as global citizens because they will be, they're going to grow up with the internet, which is global. Okay, and we have to have viable institutions to represent we, the people. Okay. Let me see, I'm not going to bother, but Robert Reich. Okay. Just read you what he has to say. And this will bring it to conclusion, I think. Okay. The market's a human creation. We have to recognize that, okay? These guys are winging it. They don't know what they're doing. They're no better at it than we are, all right? So we've got to grow beyond this notion that the market is under somebody's control. The central question is who shapes the rules for the purpose? Okay, if they continue to have unbridled influence over the rules and they gain control of the assets at the core of the new wave of innovation, which is the computer or the mechanized world, they will end up with almost all the wealth, all the income, and all the political power. Now, this is a former Secretary of Labor, okay? This isn't some Breitbart, whatever. Okay. That result is no more in their interest than in the interest of the rest of the population. Because under such conditions, an economy and a society cannot endure. The coming challenge is not to technology or to economics. It is a challenge to democracy. The critical debate for the future is not about the size of government, it's about whom government is for. The central choice is not between free market and government, it is between a market organized for broadly based prosperity and one designed to deliver almost all of the gains to few at the top. Okay, that's not it, what we're after. The pertinent issue is not how much to be taxed away from the wealthy and redistributed. Okay. It is how to design the rules of the market so the economy generates it on its own, generates what most people would consider a fair distribution. Okay, last paragraph. This is what I want to read. The vast majority of the nation's citizens do have the power to alter the rules of the market to meet their needs. But to exercise that power, they must understand what is happening and where their own interests lie. And they must join together. We have done it before. If history is any guide and common sense has any sway, we will do it again. Okay? So read, talk, learn. It's our only weapon. Because, and this interestingly enough, and Randy, my accountant, continually reminds me that I told him this. In a prospectus put together by Merrill Lynch, when Merrill Lynch was in existence, they were talking about one of their limited partnership deals or something, and they have to list the sources of risk, okay? And right in that prospectus that was being evaluated by the SEC, they listed as a major source of risk that the people will find out what we're doing. Okay? So that's what we have to do. All right? Whether we rise up with pitchforks and lanterns or whatever, okay, we can no longer be chumps. Okay? We have to know who they are and be prepared. Unfortunately, I think for my clients, we're going to go through a crash. Okay? I think that is clear by the charts, the inequity, the size of the risks that we're facing. We're going to have to go through another crash. What the result of that is, if the politicians, if they make us, you know, the payer of last resort again, and we go along with it again, all right, we have only ourselves to blame. What is it? Fool me once, shame on me, or whatever, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, okay? So, but the direction is definitely toward a global mechanism to bring these folks under control. But until we all know who they are and what they're doing, okay, it's not going to happen. Okay, thank you so much for your patience and your attention. And as I said, go forth and talk. All right, go forth and thank you very much. Discuss this with your family and your friends and anybody else who will sit nicely like you have and listen. Okay, thank you all.